By the Grace of Lady Vader. Chapter 17. "Hold still, sir," the doctor ordered in exasperation. "This will only take a second." Han squirmed anyway, and a bit of the balm, at least that's what he hoped it was, dripped down the side of his face. He reached up with handcuffed hands to wipe it off. "So you always fix up your prisoners' scrapes and bruises before they're tortured to death?" The old man frowned, creasing his already wrinkled face. "I don't particularly care what happens to my patients when I'm done with them." Probably a good view for an Imperial medic. "I just follow orders, and I was told to make you look presentable." Han felt him dab at the bruise on his face with a medicated pad. "You can't do that with a purple bruise on your forehead, so stop moving around and let me finish." "You treated anyone else today?" Han asked. "A female rebel?" The doctor responded with something that sounded like a snort. "What does that mean?" "It means that if I have to treat her for anything, the morgue is going to be busy today." Han fell silent and let the man finish his work. That was probably the best bit of news he had received since regaining consciousness. Whatever the Vaders had in mind for Leia, they apparently had no intention of physically harming her. At least not yet. Hell, he and Chewie seemed to be getting some type of royal prisoner treatment themselves. They were in one of Bespin's regular guest suites instead of a cell. Both were handcuffed and restrained, but no one had to lay a hand on them. And now a doctor was there, healing the injuries they sustained in the initial capture. So this is what it was like to be the boyfriend of the daughter of two leaders of the Empire. "All right, you're all set," the doctor said, removing his gloves and packing up his equipment. "If I were you, I'd try to stay out of the way of any other rifles." As the doctor walked out of the door, he almost ran into two stormtroopers that were entering. Lando was behind them. Han hadn't given Lando a second thought once he was captured. He only cared about getting out of there, finding Leia and leaving Bespin. But now the fury choked him, and he couldn't even think through what he wanted to say or do to him. How could you? How? No, he didn't care about how or why. About how Lando could have looked him in the face and called him a friend, or why he found it so easy to destroy their lives. Or how, "Get out of here, Lando," he growled. He almost didn't recognize his own voice, as tortured and strained as it sounded. Lando didn't respond, but spoke to one of the guards. "I have orders from Lord Vader to transport these prisoners." "Yes, sir. We can accompany you." "That won't be necessary," Lando interrupted quickly. "I was told to use minimum personnel. Apparently they still want most of this operation kept quiet." The guard eyed Chewie warily and motioned to two of the other soldiers who immediately trained their blasters on the prisoners. The foot chains were undone, and Lando's troopers took them both by the arms and led them out of the room. Han felt his focus return to where it needed to be. Once they got away from the main contingent of guards, he was certain he and Chewie could take care of Lando and his goons, even with their hands bound. As long as Chewie was quick, it wouldn't be a problem. They walked slowly down the hallway, with Lando nodding to the guards as they went by. Without looking to either side, he muttered under his breath, "Don't try anything. I'm going to get you both out of here." Han was stunned for a second. "Sure, buddy," he spat back. They entered one of the larger cargo lifts, and as soon as the doors swished shut, Chewbacca reacted. He brought his arms high over his head and slammed them down on the stormtrooper next to him, crumpling to the ground unconscious. "No, Chewie, wait!" Lando's words weren't heeded as Han struggled with his own guard, hitting him with his forearms and trying to knock his blaster away. The lift came a sudden jerking stop, throwing both of them to the floor. Lando had hit the controls and was still trying to explain something to them. Chewie shoved the man against one of the walls and pressed his arms against his neck. "Wait," he whispered hoarsely. I'm... He struggled and tried to wriggle away. "Trying to help." "Help?" Han yelled. "Chewie, just finish him off. We need to find Leia." Chewie pressed harder and Lando's eyes began bulging. "No, Why do you think..." He stopped, his arm struggling in vain to move the Wookiee off him. "They aren't firing on you?" It took a moment for Han to figure out what exactly he meant. Then he turned to the trooper behind him. "What do you mean?" "They're my staff." A deep gasp. "I got you out." Fine, you want to help? Tell me where Leia is. Get us back to the Falcon. Chewie finally relaxed his hold, and Lando collapsed, gasping desperately for air. I don't know where she is, but I'm sure the Vaders have her. He coughed violently before continuing. You won't be able to get to her by yourself. We'll see about that. What was your plan then, anyway? To call for help. You need the rebels to come. You need a plan. Han shook his head, but Lando continued. The Vaders have half the fleet here, and more Imperial ships are headed this way. Lando with difficulty returned to his feet. You're gonna need help. Chewie nodded to Han and hit the button to get the lift moving again. Try anything, and Chewie picks up where he left off. Han, I'm sorry. I didn't... Han silenced him with a murderous look. Once they reached the proper floor, Lando led them to a small office. He initiated a written message to the rebels. Those were harder to track than vocal or visual messages, asking for a backup team to get them out of there, and warning them about the Imperial presence in the city. Lando remained silent the entire time. Han finished and turned to him. I need weapons, and a seal laid out of the city. Han, I'm going after her, now. Give me the stuff and stay the hell out of my way. Lando merely nodded. Hang on, Leia, Han thought. I'm coming. Even through the haze of fear and urgency, Luke saw the beauty of Cloud City. The spires and discs rose above the sun-streaked clouds like an artist's dream. The graceful movement of the traffic waves called to mind birds on an exotic shore. Luke had always believed that nature's designs were more beautiful than man's, but on Bespin, the two worked together to create a scene that took his breath away. Focus. He drew a breath, concentrated on the stale taste of the recycled air in the X-Wing's cabin, and let it out. There was no time to appreciate the power of the place. He could feel Han and Leia nearby, both in imminent danger. Leia's presence in his mind was nearly deafening. She wasn't in physical pain, but her mind was reeling. She was angry and afraid, and hurt in some deep way that he didn't understand. No escort appeared from the city, which would have made him suspicious if he hadn't already known that things were badly amiss here. There was no hail for landing permits, no automated directive message. He finally had to simply find a landing platform, guide the X-Wing to it, and land. No one greeted him at the platform either, but the door slid up soundlessly as soon as he approached it. He was being watched. He drew his blaster and went into the corridors of Cloud City, homing in on the pulsing energy in his mind that was Leia. R2 followed him. The city seemed to be deserted here, and a heavy oppressive chord cut through the silence. He made his way down the empty hallway, certain at each doorway that an enemy would suddenly appear. They were there, naturally, in groups, just in case he chose a different path. He could feel them, like pointed weapons. In his mind, he practiced lightsaber parries from any angle of attack, and he kept his blaster at the ready for more conventional enemies. If they appear from behind me, through one of the doors I passed, go low, then draw the lightsaber to deflect fire, and then attack. R2 whistled something softly, and Luke shushed him. He didn't have a scanner to read what the droid was trying to say. If they attack from the side, fire as the door opens, before they have a chance to orient themselves to the hallway. He looked through a window and saw vast gardens in the center of the city, their beauty unmarred even by the darkness that wafted through like a cold wind. If they attack... Suddenly, he heard the unmistakable sound of stormtroopers on the march, their footfalls in perfect echoing unison on the metal floors. Leia's presence was suddenly all around him. He ducked into a side corridor. The platoon came around the corner in formation, and in the center, he saw her, dressed in blue, her hair in a simple braid. Not giving himself a chance to think, he ran out into the corridor and began to fire at the stormtroopers. The platoon fired back, but they seemed to be aiming at the floor. A wall of smoke rose up. "Luke!" Leia cried. "Luke, go back! It's a trap! Don't listen to them!" She was whisked around a corner and then suddenly appeared again. "Luke, please, don't listen! Whatever they say is a lie!" She was dragged back into the other hallway, and Luke went through the smoke to follow her. By the time he got there, the hallway was empty. It branched into several directions, and her presence was all so encompassing that he couldn't tell which one she'd taken. A door rose. It's a trap. It doesn't matter. I'm here because they're looking for me, and if I go, they'll let Han and Leia be. You know that's not true. He did know, but there weren't many options. He went through the door. It slid shut before R2 could make it, but Luke didn't notice the droid's absence until much later. At that moment, he only noticed that his retreat was blocked. If this had been a mistake, he was stuck with it. If they attack from the front, the blaster will serve for a small group, but draw the lightsaber as quickly as you can to deflect fire. The corridor led down into the working areas of the city, drawing toward the gardens he'd seen, but not along the paths of the citizens. The walls were lined with supplies and chemicals, and a stench rose from a level underneath. The pipes and power lines in the walls stood revealed. One line was smoking, and Luke noticed that a line of lights was out. With no surprise, he realized that the darkened lights led into the only corridor open to him at the next bend. He followed the path, and again the door shut behind him. Again the corridor led down, taking him beneath the level of the garden. He could smell something earthy in the air. The machines that drove the artificial wind above were here, and their endless whir droned out any sound that might have come from the rest of the city. If they attack from above... The other effect of the machines was that the constant black flow of the exhaust filled the room with a cool, swirling breeze. Sight, hearing, and touch, all was impaired in this room. Luke had only the Force to lean on, and the energy it brought him was so strong that he nearly staggered. There was a sense of victory in this room, of exhaustion, but also of confusion and fear. Beneath it, though, was a darkness and despair. Vader is here. He's waiting to kill me as he killed my father. The wind covers up the respirator. Luke drew his lightsaber. The blaster would be useless against Vader. The blade lit up a small area around him, which wasn't very useful since he still saw nothing. Something touched the back of his neck. Something soft and light, like an insect's wing. He spun, but nothing was there. He turned again, slowly into the wind, and felt the touch, steady now, covering his face. He batted at it with his lightsaber, and it fell away. It was bending to look at it when the low emergency lights came on. The first thing he saw was the veil on the ground, red, but dark enough to be almost black in the low lighting. The mark of his lightsaber was an insult to its beauty. He stood slowly, suddenly not wanting to meet the eyes of the figure who stood on the catwalk above him, her gown flowing in the wind, her uncovered hair a river of darkness. Lady Vader smiled. "Welcome, my son," she said. "I've been waiting for you." For that attack, Luke knew no parry. She refused to look at him. She simply directed her gaze up the window, upon the early moonlight silver-washed city that imprisoned her. Her small fist clenched tightly about the window sill, clenching harder every time she heard the metronome breathing behind her, despite the pain from the sore wrists which she had refused any treatment for. The swelling had gone down somewhat, and nothing appeared to be broken, in her hands at least. Any minute now, Luke will probably be walking right into her hands. Damn, you know how headstrong he is. Damn, you know he only listens when he feels like it. It hadn't been a day since she'd found out, and she was already feeling protective of him. She'd always been protective of him in a way, really, but until now it had no real focus or reasoning. She'd tried earlier to ignore them when they'd both been here, and it hadn't worked. Maybe with one of them temporarily gone it would be easier. Leia tried to ignore the scornful snort a deeply buried past of her conscious mind made at that remark. After all, despite all the hatred she felt for her father, she had a shield, an advantage against him that she lacked against her mother. Present in her earliest girlhood memories, Amidala had a latch in which she could slip through and get under Leia's weakest skin, the skin of the girl that had loved her mother more than the sun that had shone on both of them. And perhaps that made it worse, she thought. Her mother had loved her and abandoned her, but Vader had never loved her. "You worry about me far too much, my love." And now that she knew what his view of love was, she decided that was probably the greatest gift he would ever give her. She was certain that if he wanted to, Vader could crush those untrained shields of hers to dust, and yet he did not. Nor did he summon that incredible power of the Force she knew he possessed to lash out, to force her to face him. She couldn't ignore him forever, but maybe she could ignore him long enough to make him go away. Something else had to get his attention eventually, after all. This time, there was nothing in her head to contradict the scorning. "You may try to ignore me all you like, Princess. It will do you no good. I am surprised to see you continuing to waste your energy on such a futile enterprise. And yet you waste energy yourself in attempts to break me out." His deep voice vibrated, almost pleasantly on the surface, through her brain, making direct emphasis on the title. She had noted the usage of this instead of her name, or simply daughter. He was little more used to the relationship than he was. "Keeping secrets from you, her beloved as well? Well, my father, perhaps we have more in common than I thought. And maybe there is something twisted semblance of justice floating somewhere around here." If she could only make it show its face completely, not in just fleeting, ghostly wisps. Preferably not in some sort of tangible form, one she could shape into a blunt, heavy-ended weapon that she could smash this demon aside with and save her lover, and her sibling. The pieces of the clues of their relationship that floated in her head now were the same ones she had before the Vaders came along. And yet somehow their few well-placed phrases had made things come together with such quick clarity that Leia nearly berated herself for not finding out sooner. Luke. There was hope in Luke. Like her, he was one of them, and he was noble and good. Could such darkness truly beget such pure good, she wondered? And now he, along with Han, was about to be contaminated by their gloved grip. She found herself unconsciously rubbing her wrist again. Vader hadn't broken them, but he had come close. "Leia," the voice boomed more firmly, yet not really angrily. She firmly stilled a flinch. There had been so much she wanted to know about him, about her, so much she'd been denied, so much that he would certainly know. Like, what exactly was so wonderful about him that she abandoned you to him, and now suddenly wants you back? "I will not force you to face me," he said, which surprised her a bit, she admitted, "but you will speak to me." Slowly Leia turned around, meeting the shielded gaze of Vader. Part of her screamed against this. Don't succumb to him, don't do it in his way. But the part of her that had never allowed anyone to tread or trample on her, especially Darth Vader, told it, in no uncertain terms, to shut up. One thought rose above all others in her mind, requiring little effort to reach the top of her other thoughts. You would think that having such a strong hold on her for so long that you would find a better way to bend me, Lord. The room became deathly cold, but still she held the stare despite her rapidly rising fear. She finally felt something from Vader, something akin to the first brushes of a hot, surging tide, but it vanished, whether by dissipation, unlikely, or shielding on his own part. "Any hold I have is there of her own choosing," he said sternly, and Leia stilled another flinch. "That should be fairly clear to you." His voice was cold, and despite herself had the effect of making Leia begin to feel as if she were 2 feet tall. Of all the things she hadn't expected it to sound like, it was all the world to remind her of her father chastising a daughter for some transgression or another. "And she may choose to see whatever she wishes." "I'm sure that's convenient for you." She hadn't intended to let that slip out, but it was there, and there was nothing she could do. Calmly as possible, she erected her mental shields to brace for the explosion she knew was coming. Her wrists throbbed again. Surprisingly again, the explosion didn't come. He didn't even look at her, instead coming up beside her on the balcony, the evening light casting an uneasy, surreal light on his mask. His fists rested at his sides, perhaps a little more stiffly than usual. "I have no intention of establishing a happy family relationship between us," he said, his view still fixed on the dusk. "You need not fear that. Even your mother knows too much has happened for that to happen, particularly this soon. I don't even expect you to accept your position here as permanent, but I will expect you to obey, as she will. It will make things far less difficult for all of us." Say nothing to him. It was futile to protest anyway. She would have to find some way to escape from here, and maybe, just maybe, Han was still okay. It occurred to her that her safety was secondary in comparison. If Han made it out, then that would almost be worth her imprisonment here. How she missed his kisses at that moment, the warm arms that had remained open to her even when she tried to shut them. A terrifying thought occurred to her then. Would Han be foolish enough to make an attempt at rescuing her? She put it out of her mind. Whatever happened, she wasn't exactly in a position to deal with it now. She almost wished Vader had exploded. It was natural for someone to be put off guard occasionally, but he had managed to do it multiple times. It annoyed her. She wanted him to explode somehow so she could explode back. She wanted a reason to be able to scream at him. But then he decided he was going to be calm, and then when she was finally feeling reasonable, he was crushing her wrists. Was it her imagination, or were they starting to swell up again? Maybe she should get treatment for them at some point. "I do apologize for my earlier treatment of you," he said quietly into her thoughts, causing her to look up sharply. She never heard his voice this soft before, not even when it was the softness that usually was a prelude to a death threat. "I know it matters little to you, but it was never my intent to physically harm you." A dozen potential responses, all decidedly sarcastic, and some that would have certainly earned a lesser person death, flashed on the tip of her tongue so quickly she could almost feel the burning trail they left behind, and burn they did, very fiercely. She forced herself to ignore him, instead focusing on what she knew would be the most important concern of hers, more so than her putting up with the Vaders. "What about Han and Luke?" she asked, pinning him with her stare, trying to force the field of battle back to her own side. "Your companion has come to no harm, unless it was of his own choosing," her father said, and she almost smiled at the thinly veiled distaste in his tone. He disapproved of Han? Somehow that made the romantic association all that more appealing. But on the other hand, it was potentially a reason for them to inflict harm upon them. Would they do such a thing, knowing the response it would surely arise in her? Or would they even care? "That case is even more so for your brother, my daughter." "Don't call me that," she murmured, closing her eyes. "Would you rather hide from the truth?" She forced down the upsurge from the well of anger, knowing full well he meant to cloud her judgment. But then, that's what she'd always enjoyed about their confrontations. If she could stand up to Lord Vader, she could stand up to any politicians. "I've had to confront it every day for the last 3 years of my life," she said in an even tone as she could manage. "And if you have your way, I'll be confronting it even longer than that. So if I choose to close the shades from it every now and then, I hold that choice as my own. Masks do grow uncomfortable after a time." "I do not take well to hypocrisy, daughter," he said, warningly. He'd have been a fool not to notice her jab. She forced in the lump in her throat before it could fully deform. It instead reformed in her gut as a ball of slick, solid ice. "There are a lot of things that fall into that category, I recall." He ignored it. "Because your mask is not physical does not mean you've not used one," he replied coldly. "I feel the walls within you, princess, walling out any potential thing that causes you pain, even those you love, including your smuggler friend," he added with a thick coat of what could only be bitterness. "Believe me when I say you have a thick mask is the quickest way to a thin skin." "I wouldn't need those walls if it weren't for you," she bit, on each word focusing down the words that she wanted to say to him more than anything, yet was terrified to release them, for that was a side of her that was him. "I hate you. I despise you. I wish you were dead. I wish she'd never come back." "You wouldn't even have them if it weren't for me." True enough, she surmised darkly. If anything, the Force certainly would have augmented her already strong mental training from Alderaan. "Take all the credit you want," she scowled. "It takes plenty of the burden off my back, and maybe it will go toward breaking yours." She would have stormed off to her only moderately cramped cell of a room if she hadn't already been there. "Then perhaps you will have something to show gratitude for," he said, cocking his head slightly to one side in that sardonically amused way of his. "One day you will respect all your mother has gone through at this expense for you, child." "Respect is fine," Leia said smoothly, putting on her most saccharine smile, "so long as I don't have to appreciate it." "I think you will find that is one decision you will have little choice in, daughter." For a long moment they remained in their fixed places, neither willing to be the one who blinked. Heck, she didn't even know if he did blink. She wasn't sure she wanted to know of the details of what was under the mask. Whether he blinked or not, he was the one to concede defeat. Without another word, he strode out. Leia's smile remained, but it became of a different sort of nature. "We will see," she said to no one in particular. Alzel glowered at the communications array aboard the Iron Will. He was still technically the ranking officer on this ship, and if worse came to worse, correction when it did, he could take command. But for now, Admiral Merrick still said that his talents were better used in a different position. Alzel had protested, but apparently the Emperor was of the opinion that he had opened fire on Vader too soon. Since neither Merrick nor the Emperor had been there, Alzel had been unable to state his case with sufficient strength. He was sure that Vader was plotting high treason, but no one else seemed to take it seriously. So here he was, approaching Bespin on what was sure to be the decisive military strike against Vader and his woman, and he was serving as a communications technician. Never mind. He would find a way to prove himself. Captain Sequi was pacing the bridge, looking guiltily over his shoulder at Alzel. He had been given direct orders to keep the command of the ship, and Alzel would respect them, at least, of course, until he had no choice. But he didn't intend to make it any easier on the man. A captain had no business in command when an admiral was on board. A light flashed on the comm panel, and Alzel flipped the switches beneath it. A hazy, hollow image of the world of Bespin came into view. Alzel spoke into his comlink. "Admiral Merrick, we're getting preliminary surveillance signals from the scout droids." "Good. Analyze them." Alzel clenched his teeth and concentrated on focusing the images. The post wasn't entirely without precedent. He'd served as a comm officer for 2 years and performed quite adequately. The first showed 4 Star Destroyers and the Executor in orbit over a gas giant. A 5th destroyer came in out of frame, and one of the others went back out. "He is aware of our pursuit," Alzel told Merrick. "He's sending out destroyers in a rotating schedule." "I see. Any other information?" "I will bide my time." He focused the second image, the image of Cloud City. The Imperial presence, no, the Vader's presence, was growing rapidly, and Alzel thought it looked like they were emerging from hidden posts. Disgusting. Vader had hidden like a rebel, but he was coming out now, certainly. TIE fighters flew the traffic patterns, and 2 more Star Destroyers hung in orbit in the side of the world. Shuttles were coming and going. The Vaders had been quite busy here in the little hive of theirs. He saw something scarlet above the city, and he pulled the focus in more tightly. What he saw made him stand up and nearly demand that command be given back to him. Above the city, a hollow banner of the Emperor had once flown. Alzel could see one corner of the deep and dark eyes that appeared over so many outposts. No doubt that not all of them had ever been particularly loyal, but they knew enough to put on a show. Now the program had changed. Some prankster, either local or one of Vader's minions, had splashed the banner with a pixel tint. Now in place of the Emperor's watchful care, the city was overlooked by an unseen face, covered with a scarlet veil. "Admiral Alzel, have you any other information?" "Cloud City seems to be under the impression that the Empire is under new leadership." There was a long pause. Good. Merrick had certainly seen that Vader's maneuvering would come to nothing, as most maneuvering in the high Imperial circles did. He hadn't seen the way Lady Vader manipulated both her husband and the public. She had probably been plotting this attempt since her unlikely reappearance 3 years ago. And unlike the other officials, she bore deep ill will for the Emperor, and it was his place she aimed for. Alzel was certain of that, though he had no evidence, and her husband was cowed enough by that, and he helped her do it. "What kind of complement have you seen?" 7 Star Destroyers and of course the Executor, with their full complement of fighters, but our force is superior. We should be able to overcome them easily. Thank you for your strategic analysis. And since it is clear that we'll be going into battle, it would be appropriate if the ranking officer— I am the ranking officer. You are doing well at communications, Alzel. The communication was shut off, and Alzel fought an urge to fire at the comlink. That'd be a pointless gesture. Captain Sequi? Yes. Prepare the ship and crew for battle. We haven't been ordered in yet, but we'll undoubtedly will be. Vader will fight unfairly if given a chance, so we should be ready to strike quickly, and before he has a chance to fight back. Admiral, well, as I understand it, a person doesn't sneak up on Lord Vader very easily. Surely you don't believe in such nonsensical fairy tales? No, but you've seen how he... Captain, prepare the ship. If Sequi had planned to assert Merrick's directive, this was the time for it. He could, without much difficulty, send Ozzel to the brig for insubordination. He did nothing. He just gaped, his mouth opening and closing, then nodded. Yes, sir. Good. We are in agreement. Proceed. Feeling better about the situation, Ozzel found the communications array less irritating. It was time to find out where the Vaders themselves were. After all, a targeted attack was the only way to restore his good name. He could sweep in, he'd destroy these pretenders, and at last the humiliation of the past weeks would be lifted from his shoulders. Maybe he'd be given a medal. Certainly he would have a place in the history books. Ozzel, the Emperor's trusted lieutenant, who alone among the faithful acted to save the true Empire from its greatest threat. Dreaming those dreams, he let Sequi arm the iron will around him. When they entered the Bespin system, his mind was choosing a new home on Coruscant, and decided where his statue would best be displayed. The first blast struck only moments after they came out of lightspeed. Ha! Email heard her voice echo and bounce around the little communications room, and the other two technicians jumped sharply. She looked at him in triumph. Ha! She could barely contain her glee. She could feel it ready to burst right out of her. A smile stretched her face, and she watched her hands dance over the controls, verifying the code for incoming message and saving it to a datapad. Ema, what is it? One of the technicians ventured. She ignored the question and flew from the room, practically sprinting for the bridge. Her hand gripped the datapad tightly, as though she were afraid someone might come down the hallway and snatch it from her. Well, they would certainly get a fight from her if they tried. The message she was carrying was the best news the Alliance had gotten in weeks. It may well have been the best news ever. No, it was more than that. Her faith, her purpose, her conviction, it had all been restored. The rebellion would survive to fight another day. She blithely passed several people in the hallway, ignoring their curious stares. Anyone who knew her would figure out why she looked so excited. After all, she'd gained quite a bit of notoriety the last few weeks or so. What with the fight in the mess hall and the screaming match in her quarters, defending the honor of her princess, the honor of the rebellion itself hadn't won her any new friends. But she didn't mind that. No one was going to suggest that Leia had defected without hearing from her. Oh, there had been an appropriate amount of concern when the princess didn't arrive at the rendezvous point on any of the transports that came from Hoth, and it only increased when Commander Skywalker, who according to several pilots had survived the battle and left safely, and failed to show. It didn't help that Captain Solo had apparently left before the battle to take care of personal business or some other trite excuse. Had the princess and Skywalker been killed, captured, would Solo really abandon them at such a desperate hour? It wasn't until a little time had passed that the rumors began and twisted. Would they desert the rebellion? Would they betray the rebellion? The thought was completely untenable to Ema. She was from Alderaan, and though she'd never known Princess Leia herself, she felt close to her in a deeply personal way. They were both fighting the same battle, for Alderaan's forgotten and the dead, for those sacrificed by Palpatine to make a political point. No matter how difficult it had been recently for the rebellion, Ema knew that Leia was, like her, still a true believer in the cause, still bound and determined to destroy the Empire and restore some measure of justice and freedom to the galaxy, to ensure that another Alderaan never happened. The thought that she could ever do the things that she was accused of. Yet the loss of the rebels' three most prominent leaders was taking an increasingly heavy toll. For the first time there were serious whispers from some that the time had come to end their struggle, or as one commander had the nerve to put it, move the Alliance into a new decentralized and demilitarized phase. It made her ill, but without any solid news, all she had was the faith that things would work themselves out somehow. Until now. Still clutching the datapad, she entered the bridge and gave General Medine a triumphant smile. "Sir, we've received a communication from Captain Solo." A murmur rolled through the bridge. Medine nodded, encouraging her to proceed. "He's on Bespin, with Princess Leia and possibly Commander Skywalker. They've been captured by the Empire, but Captain Solo is making an attempt to free them. He's requested a strike team be sent to help them escape the city. Madine blinked at her. They're at Bespin? Yes. Are you certain? Ima frowned. The message has been verified, sir. Is there a problem? Not exactly, Madine murmured thoughtfully. In fact, Bespin's probably the most convenient place for them to be. Sir? He sighed heavily and stood from his chair to address the bridge crew. I suppose this is as good as the time as any to inform you of our next mission. We've already received orders to head for Bespin. We? A captain asked. The fleet, Madine responded. Our intelligence indicates that a strategic strike against the Empire there may prove quite productive. Ima furrowed her eyebrows skeptically. I didn't think Bespin was an Imperial stronghold. It's not, but it appears it will be the site of a major intra-Imperial skirmish. Ima gasped, as did several others. He noted the shocked looks and added, Lord and Lady Vader have decided to relieve Palpatine of control of the Empire. The Emperor is not appreciative of their offer. Our orders are to take advantage of the situation. We hope to effect a great deal of damage on both sides, as long as they are preoccupied with one another. He glanced at Ima. Organa, Solo, and Skywalker will be welcome to join us, of course. Thank you for your report. You are dismissed. Ima nodded in salute and left the bridge, her mind already racing with things she could do to help them prepare for the battle at Bespin. She couldn't even imagine what it would mean for the rebellion if they could score a big hit at Bespin. It might be as important as the victory at Yavin. On the other hand, she couldn't imagine what it would be like if it didn't work out. That was a thought she couldn't entertain.